Garry, welcome. Garry Browne is a career executive and now non-executive director and chairman who will be speaking at our event on the 27th. The title of his talk is Who is the Client? Practical Steps Successful Lawyers Take to Work with Their Best Clients. But there's a lot more to it. Garry, welcome. Tell me a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do.
Well, Hugh, thank you very much for the opportunity. It certainly is going to be a privilege to talk to lawyers. I'm not one. My brother is one. My grandfather was a lawyer. So I've been around that environment. But from my perspective, what I do is I like to think that I'm the catalyst that realizes the potential in people and help people realize their true potential. And those sort of opportunities only come when you recognize how you can work with people to lift them to another level. And I think I've done that reasonably well in my career as a leader in building consumer brands, in building people to be able to rise above levels of in their skills and capability. And I think I've done it for organizations as well. And I focus on commercial and non-for-profit organizations where I can add value. Because if I can't add any value, then I'm wasting people's time, including my own.
Excellent. Thank you. Um, we were speaking a little bit offline about this title of this talk, and I think it will really speak to what you've just said. And I guess, who is the client? What are we talking about there? Because that's kind of, to me, would be fairly obvious, right? Client's the person paying the bills, but is it really?
No, it isn't. And could I say to start off with that good lawyers rarely fail because they misunderstand the law. They actually become challenged when they don't understand who the client really is. And often the client is not the person instructing you. It's actually could be and is usually somebody else who is behind the scenes or is not necessarily one who is so visible.
Mm.
And I think that that's why you need to understand as a lawyer, and for that matter, anyone serving clients, who actually am I serving?
And how is it? I guess, how do you do that? Like, what is the step that you need to do to start developing that intuition?
Well, I think it's really about getting a handle on asking the right questions and assessing the manner in which the briefing is occurring and reading the room, depending on
Mm.
how many people are in the room, because I think it's important if you're in a meeting to understand where the power structures are
Mm.
and who is actually pulling the strings. That is critically important. We were talking about the reputation side of
Mm.
life and how important it is that the individual lawyer recognizes how important that is. In fact, I refer to reputation as the invisible client in
Mm.
every matter you run. If you ignore it, you eventually will collect a debt because you need to recognize who that client is.
Mm.
And
And
yes, you are one of the only. There's sometimes not just one client; it could be many.
And so they have to develop some sort of intuition to figure out what's the hierarchy of those clients and how do they then relate to that particular matter or deal or thing that's happening.
Correct. Correct.
And what is the impact of not doing that? You mentioned reputation, you mentioned collecting a debt, but what actually happens? What does that mean practically?
Well, I think if you don't recognize who the client is, then your relationship, when tested, it'll become very clear that you've actually hit a brick wall or you've actually not understood the landscape of and power structure of the client.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
the decision making becomes obviously uh, very important in terms of uh, fighting the the case that you are involved in,
Mm.
because sometimes it can become pear shaped when you haven't worked out who the decision maker is.
And are there any signs that might be sort of leading indicators that that's occurring? So things you can pick up before that suggest maybe you're actually not on the right track.
Well, I think firstly you need to get some clarity on the type of power structures in your own mind. For example, founders instruct, but the client could be the company. A
Mm.
chairman speaks, but the client is actually the board. A CEO might push, but the duty is owned or owed to the entity. And families plead, but the client is the estate, the trust, or the charity.
Mm.
So it's one thing to have a spokesperson; it's another thing to have a the beneficiary of your advice.
So really understanding that kind of the leadership framework or the leadership structure that might apply to the entity you're dealing with.
Exactly. So probably the test becomes for the lawyer is, if this advice is read out aloud in court, whose interests am I defending?
Mm.
That becomes very clear. And I think asking those sort of questions, um, if you haven't got clarity, your advice is exposed, no matter how well it is drafted. And I think clarity is not confrontational. It's professional leadership that one needs to manage.
And what is it then like if we could have two or three key takeaways, just a couple of traps that you could avoid. So as a lawyer going into a matter, thinking about who is the client, what are the one or two things, three things that you can do to really make sure you don't go down this rabbit hole?
I think you have to understand relationships. Have to understand uh, who the relationships are, who's involved in that particular case, and the relevance that each of those relationships play in terms of you plotting your position to provide the appropriate advice.
Well, Gary, thank you very much. Appreciate your time today, and we look forward to seeing you on the 27th.
I do too, Hugh, and thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me.